At 5 feet 2 inches and 115 pounds, Staff Sergeant Sarah Chen looked more like someone who should be working in an office than someone maintaining weapon systems that weighed more than she did. The male mechanics at Forward Operating Base Defender constantly made jokes about her size, questioning whether she could even lift the heavy weapon components she was responsible for servicing. Chin probably needs help just moving that .50 cal barrel. They'd whisper among themselves, but they had no idea that Sarah's mechanical engineering degree, combined with 5 years of specialized weapons training, had taught her that precision trumped power every single time. And when Master Sergeant Morrison publicly challenged her ability to handle heavy weapons, Sarah was about to demonstrate that the most dangerous assumptions are the ones based on appearances rather than capabilities. Forward Operating Base Defender sat in the harsh desert landscape of an unnamed country where American forces maintained strategic operations against hostile forces that threatened regional stability. The base's weapons maintenance facility was a constant hub of activity where skilled technicians serviced everything from individual rifles to crew-served weapon systems that could determine the outcome of major engagements. The maintenance bay buzzed with the methodical sounds of professionals who understood that properly functioning weapons meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Disassembly, cleaning, inspection, and reassembly were performed with ritualistic precision by technicians whose expertise kept American forces combat ready in an environment where equipment failure could cost lives. Staff Sergeant Sarah Chen worked at the station furthest from the main entrance, positioned where she could focus on complex maintenance tasks without interruption from the casual conversations and competitive banter that characterized the predominantly male workspace. Her workstation was organized with engineering precision, tools arranged in patterns that reflected both military discipline and technical efficiency that came from years of professional experience. Sarah's background was unique among the maintenance personnel at FOB Defender. While most technicians had learned their skills through military training programs and on-the-job experience, Sarah brought academic credentials that exceeded anything her colleagues possessed. Her mechanical engineering degree from Stanford University had provided theoretical knowledge that she applied to practical weapons maintenance with results that consistently impressed supervisors who reviewed her work. But academic achievement meant nothing to the other mechanics who judged competence based on physical presence and combat experience rather than technical expertise. At 115 pounds, Sarah appeared fragile compared to colleagues whose physical strength seemed more appropriate for handling weapon systems that could weigh over 100 pounds when fully configured with ammunition and mounting equipment. Master Sergeant Jake Morrison was a senior enlisted leader responsible for weapons maintenance operations throughout FOB Defender. At 38 years old, with 15 years of military experience and deployment history that included combat operations in multiple theaters, Morrison commanded respect through demonstrated competence and natural leadership that made him the unquestioned authority on heavy weapon systems. Morrison's management style reflected old-school military culture where physical capability and combat experience were the primary measures of professional worth. He respected hard work and technical competence, but his worldview had been shaped by decades in male-dominated environments where traditional gender roles went unquestioned and physical strength was considered essential for handling military equipment effectively. Morrison wasn't intentionally discriminatory, but his assumptions about women in technical roles were based on limited exposure to female personnel in combat support positions. His experience had reinforced beliefs about gender-appropriate assignments that prevented him from recognizing capabilities that didn't match his expectations about what effective weapons specialists looked like. The relationship between Morrison and Sarah exemplified broader challenges facing military organizations adapting to evolving personnel policies while maintaining operational effectiveness in high-stress environments. Morrison respected Sarah's work ethic and attention to detail, but questioned whether her physical limitations would prevent her from performing duties that required handling heavy equipment under combat conditions. Sarah understood Morrison's skepticism and had encountered similar attitudes throughout her military career. Rather than confronting these assumptions directly, she had chosen to demonstrate her capabilities through consistent performance that spoke louder than arguments about gender equality or discriminatory treatment that would have created workplace conflicts without changing underlying attitudes. The maintenance bay operated on shift schedules that ensured 24-hour coverage for weapon systems that might require emergency service during combat operations. Sarah typically worked the early morning shift from 0400 to 1200 hours, when the facility was quieter and she could focus on complex maintenance tasks without interruption from personnel who might question her methods or capabilities. During her 8 months at FOB Defender, Sarah had established routines that maximize her efficiency while minimizing interactions that might lead to conflict with colleagues who remained skeptical about women in technical roles. She arrived early, worked methodically, and completed assignments with precision that consistently exceeded quality standards without drawing attention to achievements that might threaten male colleagues who needed to feel superior. Sarah's approach to weapons maintenance reflected her engineering background and natural perfectionism. Where other technicians might perform routine service according to standard procedures, Sarah analyzed each weapon system as a complex mechanical puzzle that required complete understanding rather than rote memorization of maintenance checklists that missed subtle indicators of potential problems. Her workstation contained reference materials that most technicians ignored: technical manuals, engineering specifications, ballistics data, and maintenance logs that documented every component's service history with detail that exceeded military requirements. Sarah used this information to identify patterns and predict maintenance needs that prevented equipment failures before they occurred. The M2 Browning .50 caliber machine gun represented the pinnacle of crew-served weapons technology that had remained essentially unchanged since its development in the early 20th century. Weighing 84 pounds without ammunition and firing projectiles that could penetrate light armor at ranges exceeding 1,800 meters, the M2 demanded respect from personnel who operated and maintained its complex mechanical systems. Sarah had been assigned primary responsibility for M2 maintenance throughout FOB Defender, a duty that required her to service, test, and certify weapons that were critical to base defense and offensive operations. Her engineering background allowed her to understand the weapon's mechanical principles at levels that exceeded most operators' knowledge, giving her insights into performance optimization that weren't covered in standard training programs. The morning that changed everything began like any other. Sarah arrived at 0400 hours to find 3 M2 systems awaiting scheduled maintenance, each requiring complete disassembly, inspection, and certification before a return to operational status. The work was methodical and time-consuming, demanding attention to detail that ensured perfect function when lives depended on reliable performance. Morrison arrived at 0630 hours for his daily inspection of maintenance operations, walking through the facility with practiced eyes that assessed both work quality and personnel performance. He paused at Sarah's workstation where she was performing precision adjustments on an M2's headspace and timing, critical procedures that affected both safety and accuracy. "Chen, how long have you been working on that weapon?" Morrison asked, noting that Sarah had been methodical in her approach to tasks that other technicians might have completed more quickly. Sarah looked up from her precision measurements, her concentration momentarily broken by Morrison's question. "Master Sergeant, I've been conducting complete systems analysis for 2 hours. I identified timing irregularities that required additional adjustment beyond standard maintenance procedures." Morrison examined Sarah's work, noting the precision with which she had documented every measurement and adjustment. Her thoroughness was impressive, but he questioned whether her methodical approach was practical for operational environments where speed might be as important as perfection. "Chen, in combat situations, we need weapons that function reliably, not museum pieces that have been adjusted to microscopic tolerances," Morrison observed. "Sometimes good enough is better than perfect if perfect takes too long to achieve." Sarah's response reflected both technical expertise and understanding of operational requirements. "Master Sergeant, the timing irregularities I corrected could have caused catastrophic weapon failure under sustained fire conditions. The additional time invested in proper adjustment prevents equipment loss and potential casualties that would result from mechanical failure during critical engagements." Morrison appreciated Sarah's technical knowledge, but questioned whether her academic approach to maintenance translated into practical understanding of how weapons performed under combat stress. Theory and practice were different things, and he wasn't convinced that classroom engineering education prepared someone for the realities of battlefield equipment management. "Chen, have you ever actually fired any of these weapons you maintain so carefully?" Morrison asked, genuinely curious about whether Sarah's maintenance expertise included practical shooting experience. Sarah's hesitation before answering suggested that Morrison's question had identified a potential limitation in her qualifications. Master Sergeant, I have completed all required familiarization training, but my primary focus has been on maintenance rather than operational employment. Morrison nodded, understanding that Sarah's response confirmed his suspicions about the difference between theoretical knowledge and practical experience. Maintaining weapons was one thing. Understanding how they performed under actual firing conditions was something else entirely. The conversation might have ended there, but Sergeant First Class David Martinez chose that moment to join the discussion with comments that escalated the situation beyond routine supervisory interaction. Martinez was a 28-year-old weapons specialist whose combat experience in Iraq and Afghanistan had given him confidence about heavy weapons employment that he wasn't shy about expressing. His approach to Sarah had always been condescending, reflecting attitudes about women in combat roles that hadn't evolved despite changing military policies. Sarge, Chen's a great mechanic, but let's be honest about physical realities, Martinez interjected. The M2 weighs 84 pounds and generates recoil that would knock someone her size flat on their back. Some jobs just require masculine strength that women don't possess. Martinez's comments reflected attitudes that Morrison didn't entirely disagree with, even though he wouldn't have expressed them so directly. Physical capability was an important consideration for personnel assignments, and there were legitimate questions about whether smaller individuals could effectively handle heavy weapon systems under combat conditions. Sarah had endured similar comments throughout her military career, but Martinez's public statement in front of Morrison represented a direct challenge to her professional competence that couldn't be ignored without accepting limitations that might affect her career advancement and assignment opportunities. Sergeant Martinez, physical strength is less important than proper technique when operating crew-served weapons, Sarah responded calmly. Mechanical advantage, body positioning, and understanding of recoil management can compensate for size differences when equipment is employed correctly. Martinez laughed dismissively. Chun, that's textbook theory. In reality, when you're under fire and need to move a .50 cal into position quickly, engineering principles don't matter if you can't physically manipulate the equipment. Women just don't have the upper body strength for heavy weapons employment. Morrison found himself in the middle of a workplace conflict that reflected broader organizational challenges about gender integration in combat roles. Martinez's comments were inappropriate, but they raised legitimate questions about physical requirements for certain military duties that couldn't be dismissed entirely. Martinez, your concerns about physical requirement are valid, but your delivery is unprofessional, Morrison said, attempting to balance respect for Sarah with acknowledgement of practical considerations that affected operational effectiveness. Sarah recognized that this conversation represented a defining moment in her military career. She could accept Martinez's characterization of her limitations, or she could demonstrate capabilities that might change perceptions about women in technical roles. Her decision would affect not only her own professional standing, but potentially influence how other women were evaluated for similar assignments. Master Sergeant, I request permission to demonstrate practical employment of the M2 system, Sarah said with quiet confidence that suggested this wasn't an impulsive decision, but a carefully considered challenge to assumptions about her capabilities. Morrison was surprised by Sarah's request. Demonstration firing of crew-served weapons required extensive safety coordination and supervisory oversight that went beyond routine maintenance operations. But Sarah's challenge represented an opportunity to resolve questions about her practical capabilities in a way that would benefit everyone involved. Chen, demonstration firing requires safety protocols and ammunition expenditure authorization that I'd need to coordinate with higher headquarters, Morrison replied. This isn't something we can arrange immediately. Sarah had anticipated Morrison's response and was prepared with a solution that demonstrated her understanding of military procedures as well as her determination to prove her capabilities. Master Sergeant, I reviewed base regulations regarding weapons testing procedures. Maintenance personnel are authorized to conduct function testing using up to 50 rounds of ammunition per weapon system to verify proper operation following major maintenance. Morrison checked Sarah's regulatory citation and confirmed that her interpretation was correct. Maintenance testing was legitimate and wouldn't require special authorization if conducted according to established safety procedures and within ammunition limits specified in base regulations. Chen, if you want to conduct function testing, we'll need to coordinate with range control and ensure proper safety oversight, Morrison decided. But understand that this is about verifying weapon function, not proving theoretical points about gender and military assignments. Sarah agreed to Morrison's conditions, but both of them understood that the test fire would accomplish much more than routine function verification. It would provide definitive evidence about Sarah's practical capabilities with heavy weapon systems that could settle questions about her assignments and potentially change perceptions about women in similar roles. The coordination for Sarah's demonstration took 2 days to arrange. Range control required advanced scheduling for crew-served weapons firing. Safety personnel had to be assigned for oversight, and ammunition had to be allocated from base supplies according to proper accounting procedures that ensured accountability for every round expended. During the preparation period, word of Sarah's upcoming demonstration spread throughout the maintenance facility and beyond. Personnel who had never paid attention to the quiet mechanic were suddenly interested in whether the small woman who serviced their weapons could actually operate them effectively under realistic conditions. Martinez and several other male technicians made side bets about Sarah's performance, with most predicting that she would struggle to control the M2's recoil and rate of fire. Their assumptions reflected broader skepticism about women in combat roles that persisted despite changing military policies and increasing evidence of female capability in previously male-dominated fields. Morrison found himself genuinely curious about the outcome. His experience told him that physical strength was important for heavy weapons employment, but Sarah's technical expertise and quiet confidence suggested that she might possess capabilities that weren't immediately apparent from her physical appearance. The demonstration took place on a Wednesday morning at 0800 hours when range conditions were optimal and safety personnel were available for proper oversight. The M2 was mounted on a standard tripod at a concrete firing position that provided stable platform for accurate shooting at targets positioned at 500, 800, and 1,200 meter distances. Sarah arrived at the range wearing standard combat equipment that made her appear even smaller than usual. The body armor, helmet, and load-bearing equipment seemed oversized for a petite frame, reinforcing impressions about physical incompatibility between her size and the demands of operating heavy weapon systems effectively. Morrison and the assembled observers watched as Sarah conducted pre-firing procedures with methodical precision that reflected her maintenance background. She inspected ammunition, verified weapon settings, and confirmed range safety procedures with attention to detail that impressed supervisors, even though it delayed the actual shooting that everyone was waiting to observe. "Chen, are you ready to begin function testing?" Morrison asked, noting that Sarah had spent nearly 30 minutes on preparation procedures that most operators completed in half that time. Sarah settled behind the M2 with movements that appeared increasingly confident as she adjusted her position and prepared for firing. "Master Sergeant, weapon is ready for function testing. Request permission to commence firing." Morrison granted permission and positioned himself where he could observe Sarah's performance while maintaining safe distance from the weapon's blast effects. The other observers spread out along the firing line, most expecting to witness confirmation of their assumptions about physical limitations and gender-appropriate military assignments. Sarah's first burst of fire surprised everyone observing. Instead of the uncontrolled recoil and muzzle climb that they expected from someone her size, Sarah maintained perfect control of the weapon, while delivering accurate fire that struck targets with precision that exceeded most operators' capabilities. Her body position was textbook perfect, using mechanical principles to manage recoil rather than relying on physical strength to overpower the weapon's energy. Her understanding of the M2's characteristics allowed her to anticipate and compensate for factors that challenged larger operators who tried to muscle their way through firing procedures. "Jesus Christ," whispered Martinez as he watched Sarah's tracers impact exactly where she was aiming. "She's actually controlling that thing." Sarah's second burst demonstrated consistency rather than luck. Her shots created tight groups on targets at 500 meters with accuracy that would have been impressive from experienced heavy weapon specialists using the same equipment under identical conditions. Morrison found himself watching shooting performance that challenged every assumption he'd made about physical requirements for heavy weapons employment. Sarah wasn't just managing the M2's recoil. She was achieving accuracy that suggested complete mastery of techniques that most operators struggled to learn. Chen transitioned to the 800-meter target. Morrison called out, wanting to see if Sarah's performance would deteriorate at longer ranges where environmental factors became more significant influences on accuracy. Sarah's adjustment to the longer-range target demonstrated understanding of ballistics and environmental compensation that went far beyond basic operator training. She made scope adjustments with precision that reflected deep knowledge of the weapon's capabilities and limitations at extended distances. Her firing at 800 meters maintained the same precision she had demonstrated at closer range. Each burst created groups that would have qualified for expert marksmanship awards if this had been a formal competition rather than routine function testing. The assembled observers watched in silence that reflected growing amazement at performance that exceeded their expectations and challenged their assumptions about capability versus appearance. Sarah wasn't just operating the M2 effectively, she was demonstrating mastery that few experienced gunners achieved. Chen, engage the 1,200-meter target, Morrison ordered, pushing the test distances where most operators struggled to achieve consistent accuracy even under optimal conditions. Sarah's preparation for the long-range engagement showed her understanding of advanced gunnery techniques that weren't covered in basic training programs. She studied wind conditions, adjusted her aim point for environmental factors, and settled into her firing position with confidence that suggested extensive experience rather than beginner's luck. Her shots at 1,200 meters struck with precision that stunned everyone observing. The impacts were visible through spotting scopes as tight groups that demonstrated not just accuracy, but understanding of long-range shooting principles that separated expert marksmen from competent operators. Martinez stared through his binoculars at targets that showed evidence of shooting excellence he couldn't deny. Sarge, she's out shooting guys who've been on crew-served weapons for years. How the hell is someone that small controlling a .50 can like it a personal weapon? Morrison lowered his spotting scope and looked at Sarah with new respect that reflected fundamental changes in his understanding of capability versus appearance. Chun, cease fire and make the weapon safe. Outstanding shooting that exceeds any demonstration I've witnessed from operators twice your size. Sarah secured the M2 according to proper procedures, while maintaining the professional demeanor that had characterized her performance throughout the demonstration. She had proven her point without arrogance or commentary about gender discrimination, allowing her shooting to speak for itself. Master Sergeant, weapon function testing complete, Sarah reported. All systems operated within normal parameters. No maintenance issues identified during firing. Morrison approached Sarah with an expression that mixed professional respect with personal amazement at what he had just witnessed. 20 years of experience with heavy weapons had not prepared him for watching someone challenge every assumption about physical requirements and operational capability. Chun, that was exceptional marksmanship that redefines my understanding of what's possible with proper technique and equipment knowledge. Morrison said directly, "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Sarah's response reflected both technical expertise and natural humility about abilities that she had never needed to demonstrate until challenged by circumstances beyond her control. Master Sergeant, mechanical engineering education included ballistics coursework and practical applications. I've been studying crew-served weapons employment as part of my professional development, but this was my first opportunity to apply theoretical knowledge under realistic conditions. Morrison realized that Sarah's academic background had provided her with understanding of weapons employment that exceeded practical training most operators received. Her engineering education hadn't just taught her how to maintain weapons. It had given her insights into optimal employment techniques that she had never been allowed to demonstrate. Chun, I need to apologize for assumptions I made about your capabilities based on physical appearance rather than technical competence, Morrison said with a directness that characterized his management style. Your demonstration today proved that effective weapons employment depends more on knowledge and technique than physical strength. Martinez approached with obvious embarrassment about his earlier comments regarding women and heavy weapons employment. Chun, I owe you an apology for things I said about physical limitations and gender-appropriate assignments. What you just did with that .50 cal was better than anything I've seen from most experienced gunners. Sarah accepted both apologies with grace that reflected her understanding that changing attitudes was more important than personal vindication. Master Sergeant, Sergeant Martinez, I appreciate your recognition, but this demonstration was about proving capabilities rather than settling personal disputes. We're all professionals working toward the same objectives. Morrison made a decision that would change Sarah's military career and potentially influence how other women were evaluated for similar assignments. Chun, I'm recommending you for advanced gunnery training that will qualify you as a heavy weapons instructor. Your combination of technical knowledge and practical capability represents exactly what the Army needs for next-generation weapons specialists. The recommendation represented recognition that transcended personal opinions about gender roles and acknowledged capability that could benefit broader military objectives. Sarah's demonstration had proven that assumptions about physical requirements were less important than technical competence and proper training. Additionally, Morrison continued, I want you to develop training programs that teach other personnel the techniques you use today. Your approach to recoil management and accuracy at extended ranges could improve performance throughout our weapons training programs. Sarah's acceptance of Morrison's offer reflected her understanding that the opportunity represented more than personal career advancement. Her success could influence how other women were evaluated and assigned, potentially opening doors that had been closed based on assumptions rather than demonstrated capability. Over the following months, Sarah developed into one of the most sought-after heavy weapons instructors in the region. Her training program combined theoretical knowledge with practical techniques that improved performance for both male and female personnel who had struggled with traditional approaches to crew-served weapons employment. Morrison continued his leadership role with new appreciation for the difference between assumptions and evidence. His experience with Sarah taught him that capability could emerge from unexpected sources, and that the most dangerous assumptions were often the ones that seemed most logical based on limited experience. The weapons maintenance facility at FOB Defender became known throughout the region for producing operators whose heavy weapons skills exceeded conventional standards. Personnel from other bases requested training from Sarah's programs, and her techniques were incorporated into official training doctrine that improved capability across multiple units. Martinez evolved from skeptic to advocate, frequently telling other personnel about the day he learned that physical strength was less important than technical knowledge and proper technique. His attitude change influenced other soldiers who had similar assumptions about gender and military capability. Sarah's story became legend among personnel who understood that exceptional ability could emerge from unexpected sources when given opportunity to demonstrate rather than assume limitations based on appearance or preconceptions about appropriate roles. The demonstration that began as routine function testing became proof that the most dangerous assumptions are often the ones that seem most reasonable based on limited experience and conventional wisdom about physical requirements versus technical expertise. Master Sergeant Morrison learned that 20 years of experience meant nothing when faced with evidence that challenged fundamental assumptions about capability, gender, and the difference between what seemed logical and what was actually possible when talent met opportunity. The mechanic who looked too small to handle heavy weapons became the instructor who redefined what heavy weapons employment could achieve. And everyone learned that sometimes the most powerful demonstrations of capability come from people who don't look like they belong until they prove that belonging has nothing to do with appearance and everything to do with competence.